Hi guys, I am here with your guys' story today out of my Dreams and Miracles book. Today's story is a couple pages long. It's called Falling Off Cliffs. It's a true story by Andersen. And I will start off with reading you the introduction as always. Lauren is a successful editor with one of New York's largest publishers. She has worked for many years as an acquiring editor with several bestsellers to her credit. Recently, she turned her attention to spearheading and running a very successful book club. Despite her many achievements, she hasn't always been able to appreciate them. Somehow her successes have been diminished by the feeling that she was never quite doing enough. Here's how her dreams revealed the crux of the problem, enabling her to make some important changes, one that helped her reshape her understanding of God and His care. Now we will get into the story. Others often get a bad rap in our society. They get blamed for everything. That's wrong with us. From thumb-sucking to psychotic breakdown. So the last thing I want to do is add more fuel to that particular fire. Still, I have to admit that my own relationship with my mother hasn't always been very healthy. Let me start by explaining that she has many wonderful and endearing qualities. She is a woman whose own deep faith has influenced me profoundly, but she is also a woman with an iron will and impossibly high standards, whose two daughters will never measure up to her dreams for them. I had been raised to think that my sister and I were somehow responsible for her happiness. For instance, my mother never had a driver's license until she was forced to get one after my father's death. As soon as we were old enough, we drove her everywhere. Also, my mother never made plans of her own, but relied on my sisters and me to entertain her on weekends, even after we grew up and moved out in our own homes. Partly because my mother was a very religious woman, I had a hard time separating my idea of God from my relationship with her. As far as I was concerned, they were like two peas in a pod. If I couldn't please her, I couldn't possibly please God. I'll never forget the time I landed my first writing assignment. A major magazine called and asked me to write a piece for them. Thrilled and certain mother would share the excitement, I phoned with the news, but her response was underwhelming. "Well, what's the circulation?" she asked. When I told her it was a couple 100,000, she only said, "But isn't it a bit flaky?" I assured her it was a respectful and influential publication, but she wasn't about to be persuaded. "Send me the draft when you finish it," was all she said. I hung up the phone thinking I may satisfy other people in my life. One day I may even satisfy God, but I will never, ever satisfy my own mother. Looking back on my childhood, I realized that I was sheltered, dependent, and much too perceptive of my own good. When I was only 7, I began having a reoccurring nightmare. Like most children, I had scary dreams about being chased. An enormous lion would come after me when I was playing outside. I would run as fast as my small legs would carry me, certain that powerful jaws would shred me to pieces. But just as the beast was about to overtake me, I was wakened, relieved that I had only been suffering my too familiar dream. One night the dream changed and the lion chased me through the yard and right into the house. I rushed to the safest place I could think of, my parents' bedroom. But when I reached it, the door wouldn't budge. My mother was inside, and despite my pleading, she refused to unlock it. She was sorry, she explained, but she just couldn't let me in. As I peered through the keyhole, I could see her on the other side of the door with her arms around my little girls, about my size, but they didn't look like children. They looked like mini replicas of my mother. She wouldn't open the door because the lion might rush through and attack them. In my dream, it seemed as though the girls were her daughters, sisters I had never met. Years later, I recounted the dream to a therapist who suggested that the two girls in my dream represented the two daughters my mother would have liked to have had rather than the two she did have. She wanted children who would grow up to become just like her rather than two unruly little girls who would one day become women of their own right. That understanding cleared up a lot of confusion I was experiencing and helped me deal with the tremendous guilt I felt at not being the mother of the daughter not being my mother wanted. A few years ago, my mother and I both had similar dreams, only 2 days apart. How such a thing can happen is a mystery to me, but I do know that her dream and mine startled me into a deeper realization that I needed to make changes in our relationship. I was asleep in my old room while visiting my mother at Christmas when I had the following nightmare. I was standing on top of a tall building in New York City. Though I wasn't in any danger of falling, I was holding tightly to someone who was slipping over the edge. I knew that if I didn't manage to pull that person up, they would fall several stories to the sidewalk below. But as much as I strained and tugged, I just couldn't haul them to safety. Then I realized the person I was trying to hold onto was my mother. But it was no use. I had to let go, and she slipped from my grasp. I woke up. My heart was pounding so hard. I was shaking. I was so upset by the dream that I told no one about it. 2 days later, after I had returned to New York, my mother called and said, "Lauren, I've had a very upsetting dream, and I just had to call to make sure you were all right. I dreamed you were a little girl and that you had just returned from playing at a friend's house. We were standing outside in the yard, and you were telling me that you had obeyed me and that you hadn't gone near a certain street I had forbidden you to cross. And as you were telling me this, you suddenly stepped back and walked straight off a cliff, and there was nothing I could do to save you." My mother was reassured to hear I was well, but I was astonished by the similarity of our dreams. I had tried but failed to save her from falling off the edge of a tall building. She had tried but failed to keep me from walking off the edge of a cliff. Though our bond as mother and daughter wasn't a healthy one, I believe it was so strong that we somehow managed a deeper kind of communication. Both of us must have been picking up subtle cues that became expressed in our dreams. The dreams convinced me I needed to change the way I related to her. It was time for me to let go of her expectations, to pull back and stop playing the game according to her rules. In a manner of speaking, I needed to walk off the edge of the cliff so that I could start living my own life. I needed to let go of her hand and trust that she would find a way to stand on her own 2 feet. Particularly, it meant that I needed to establish some healthy boundaries that should have been in place years ago. For instance, I decided I could no longer tell my mother about all the exciting and important details of my life. If I did, she would simply deflate them and I would be crushed. Sad as it was, I could no longer afford this kind of intimacy. I also decided to join the church, a decision that didn't meet with my Baptist mother's approval. As I made these and other changes in my life, it began to dawn on me that perhaps God really did love me after all. He cherished the person I actually was, rather than the person I was trying so desperately to become. Obviously, my difficulties with my mother have a strong psychological basis, but working through these issues has changed my relationship with God. My spiritual journey is no longer based on the need to please my mother, but on a real hunger for God, who I now believe has a unique purpose in my life. Dreams don't make Dreams don't make you a better person. It's what you do with them that counts. But I'm grateful that some of my dreams have given me the insight I needed to become a stronger person, and in the long run, maybe even a better daughter. And that was the end of Lauren Andersen's story, Falling Off Cliffs. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's story. And tomorrow, or God willing, when we come back to read the next story, it's going to be A Dream Helped Save My Marriage. I hope you guys have a good rest of your night. Bye, guys. God bless.